family, what's good with you? It's your boy 2A in LA, and as always, fam, anything I say in this episode, prior episodes, and future episodes is just my personal opinion. Don't take it as fact. Don't take it as law. Always do your own homework and come up with your own conclusions. Right about now, fam, I should go ahead and tap that like button for your boy. If you're new to the channel, I want to say welcome. Come on in. You can join the congregation by smashing that subscribe button and requesting all post notifications. And if you are an existing supporter of this channel, fam, I appreciate you more than you can possibly imagine. You are the reason this channel is anything. All right, fam, let's get into this episode. So look, fam, this is one that you guys have really been wanting. This gun sparked my curiosity. I gotta say, when I first heard that Jacob Grey was going to come out with kind of a high-end 2011, for those of you guys who don't know, Jacob Grey kind of made their bones like going up against at the time what was entry level. This is kind of before the Turkish onslaught of guns started coming in. They were positioning themselves as, you know, an American-owned manufacturer company, kind of directly competing against what at the time were entry-level guns, the Staccato P's of the world, Staccato C's, the Bull Armories, etc. And so their initial offering, the TWC9, came in right around the $2,500 mark, and then they came out with the black, which had a few different features and improved upon the original design, and that was a few $100s more. Then they came out with the covert limited edition version, which I have, and if you haven't seen the review on that gun, definitely go back and check it out. But I thought that gun was great. They brought in some, again, some different styling, some upgrades to the gun. They ported that gun. I thought it was very well done. And then they kind of advanced to the Hex. Now, by the time they got to the covert limited edition and the Hex, the guns had kind of gone from like 2,500 to 3,500. When they talked about coming in with a gun that was close to 6K, and I started thinking about the guns that are kind of in that range, the Combat Precisions of the world, the Atlases of the world, the Fowlers of the world, and others. I wanted to see, you know, kind of what that would look like and what kind of features that gun would have. And then when they first started kind of dropping the artwork of the gun, they started taking it out to a couple of the trade shows and range days, and people were coming back saying what a really good shooter it was. Like I said, it further piqued my interest. I reached out to my guys at Jacob Grey and said, hey, you got to get me one of these guns out here so I can test ASAP, right? I need it as soon as possible, and my friends did not disappoint. Check out the NOX9 by Jacob Grey. This gun is their parlay into kind of the high-end luxury area of the 2011 space. This is a gun that is not only ported but compensated, and we will certainly dive into that more as we get into the review. But if you haven't seen the initial impressions video I did on this, definitely go back and check that out, because I think it's illuminating. And now that I've had the opportunity to get it out to the range and put a lot of rounds through it, I'm anxious to get in and kind of talk you guys through my experience. All right, fam, if you haven't seen a 2A in LA review, essentially the way it works is this. 0 is the lowest possible score. 100 is the highest possible score. I've never had a gun get a 0, never had a gun get 100, but one can always hold out hope. Generally speaking, if you got a gun that's kind of 50 to 60, that's a right down the middle gun. It's reliable, gonna go bang every time, but you know, lacks some feels and thrills to it. If you got something kind of 60 to 70, that gun may have a feature or two that separates it from the mean. If you got something kind of 70 to 80, okay, well now you're cooking with a little bit of gas. Now you've got a gun that is somewhat feature rich and really distinguishes itself from kind of all the kind of mid-level guns. If you got something kind of 80 to 89, okay, now we're talking about kind of best in class firearms, specifically if you're kind of 85 to 89. And if you got something that's 90 above, that's grail gun status. All right, fam, so look, let's get into the Jacob Grey NOX. I will go ahead and I will put up the specs for this gun so I can focus more on kind of what it is. I'll say this. I love what they attempted to do here. I think I've got a video that's coming out, like when great is not good enough. It's one thing for a gun company to make a gun that shoots as good as other guns in its kind of price range. But if you aren't offering anything special, if you aren't offering anything new, if your gun is kind of rinse and repeat the same as everybody else's gun, then I don't know why is somebody going to buy your gun over the next person's gun, right? So this is one of the concerns I had with Jacob Grey. I'm like, okay, you guys are going dramatically upstream, almost doubling your price point, right? There are a lot of great guns that are being produced in this area. What are you going to bring to the table that other guns in that area are not? And when I look at this gun, I look at their own custom grip module. The grip makes up probably about 50% of the total real estate of the gun. And so in terms of the aesthetic of the gun, it is a huge part of the gun. And this is why sometimes when people will buy a Chile grip or an Atlas grip or a Miller Precision grip or MJD grip, and these grips all kind of look alike, you start having the situation where people say, oh, all 2011s look alike. Well, I love that they created their own grip module. I love the way they have contoured the grip module to fit the hand, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the ergonomics of the gun. But they blended this grip module to the backstrap beautifully. There are no hot spots to be found on this firearm. I find that the serrations work fine. I said this in my initial impressions video. If it were me, I would have had that serration pattern go all the way down to the frame. I think the gun, like from this far and back, looks stunning. I think it starts to fall off a little bit on the front end of the gun, just in terms of aesthetic design. But in terms of functionality, these grips are solidly done. This gun is DLC coated with the exception of kind of the rose gold parts, which are PVD. Look, I think they did a phenomenal job. Look, Jacob Grey comes from an aerospace background, so they are used to producing materials with very finite specifications, and it shows. It showed in the quality of the TWC9. Now, there is certainly room for improvement from their original version of the TWC9 in terms of aesthetics, but in terms of the way the gun fit and ran, those were great shooting guns. I see the same thing here. We'll talk about how well the gun is sprung, but the tolerances on this gun are really tight. There's no wiggle, slide to frame, no wiggle, grip to frame, barrel lockup is beautiful. So I think they did an excellent job relative to the fit and finish of the gun. For fit and finish, we're going to give it a 15 out of a possible 15. All right, fam. Next up, durability. Again, all metal gun, steel frame, steel slide, aluminum grip, DLC coated, except for the small parts in the barrel, which is PVD. I think they made a very, very durable gun. This is definitely one of those where if you take care of it, it will take care of you. This is a test gun, so it had a lot of rounds before it got to me, and then I certainly put a ton of rounds through it. A lot of times you can tell, fam, when you start when a gun is PVD coated and it's ported and you start shooting rounds through it, one of the telltale signs is when it comes time to clean that gun and you wipe it down, does the carbon buildup just kind of ease right off? It does with this gun. It says something to me that given the amount of rounds that have already been put through this gun, that the colorways, the DLC coating and the PV coating are holding up nicely. Again, I think it's a durable gun. You take care of it, it'll take care of you. Durability, we're going to give it a 15 out of a possible 15. All right, fam. Next up, trigger. You guys know your boy is a trigger snob, so let me let you guys check it out. You've got very little take up, if at all. You're at that wall. Crisp, clean break, reset, very short reset. So look, what I would say, fam, is this trigger kind of took me by surprise. It is very, very pleasant to shoot. When I picked the gun up, I was like, first thing I do really is I check out the trigger. And sometimes it is obvious that the trigger is feathery smooth. When I first pulled this trigger, I thought it was probably between 2.5 pounds, or right around 2.5 pounds. And then though, when I took it and I started shooting, I was like, oh no, this trigger feels lighter. And then when I put it, and I'll put the trigger weight up there. When I tested the trigger weight and found out it was a sub 2 pound trigger, I was like, oh, it feels heavier. It presents heavier than it actually is, but it ran phenomenally. I love the speed that you can get relative to this trigger. It has more of a rounded bow than a flat bow. I prefer more flat face trigger, but the trigger's well done. Is it an infinity trigger? I don't think it's that, but I still think it's very good for trigger. We're going to give it 14 out of a possible 15. All right, fam. Next up, reliability. So this is the area where I felt like the gun suffered a little bit. And I said this in my initial impressions video. Look, fam, firearms are kind of like engines in an automobile. There's a lot of things that you can do to a car that will generate more power, more horsepower, right? Will make the car faster or make the car louder, whether that's changing out exhaust. But the test is how all of these things kind of work together. And when you come in and you have a comp, and I mentioned too that this comp is a relatively small comp. Especially given the size of it, it's kind of like you've got a sight block and a comp in one, and then you've got the 3 inline ports there. So look, when you compensate a gun, or when there's a sight block on the gun, when you port a gun, all things come into play, right? Like, how good is the grip module for somebody to be able to secure a really, really good grip on it? What's the weight on the front end of the gun? What's the weight of the grip? How well is the gun balanced? How is the gun sprung? What eternals are being used? How much polishing has been done to fine tune these things? All these things go together. And ideally, all of these things should be firing like a car on all cylinders. What I found on this is I encountered some reliability issues, some failure to feed, some stovepiping issues. I'm not going to attribute that to a break-in period because I believe this gun had, you know, a fair amount of rounds before it got to me. I'm not sure how many, but what I would say is What caused it could be which caused the malfunctions could be any number of things. I know James from is a TFB channel. He reviewed it, and he had some reliability issues as well. He attributed that to the ammo that's being used. And see, that's part of the thing. Like, there are variables that Jacob Grey has no control over, right? Like, what manufacturer of ammunition are you going to use? What grain are you going to use? Are you going to be running jacketed hollow points through it? Is it 115? Is it 124? Is it 147? All those things come into play. Now, I generally use on 2011s across the board 124 grain full metal jacket ammo. In my experience, that is the grain kind of choice for ported and compensated guns, ported and or compensated guns. And so that's what I typically run. But if this gun was kind of sprung more with 115 grain in mind, then that could explain it. So it could have been ammo related. It could have been mag related. In addition to using their mags, I used Atlas mags and MBX mags, and I used Staccato mags. And it took all the magazines, and so that's fine. I don't necessarily think it was a mag issue. It could have been. I am likely to think it's a combination of the ammo I was using relative to the spring. Now, they did provide an alternative spring, and I didn't change the spring out. I just didn't have time on the fly or whatever. But I would say, you know, I have said this about, and we will be comparing this gun to a lot of guns. One of the guns we'll compare it to is my Combat Precision GT Dark Horse. And I have said on that gun, given the fact that it's a hybrid, it's also ported, it's also comped, I have said on that gun, like, I feel like given that it's ported and comped, the spring weight should be lighter. But one of the things that a guy like Chris James does at Combat Precision is he's going to run 115, 124, 147, and he's going to put a spring weight in where he feels it will reliably function no matter what the ammo is. And I think probably they just need to dial in this gun just a hair, or probably change out the spring to the one that was provided. But it did have some reliability issues. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, the reliability issues were constant. They were overwhelming. They impacted my ability to do the review. It wasn't that. It was just not as reliable as I would have hoped, given the price point, given my history with Jacob Grey guns. Again, I've reviewed the TWC9. I reviewed the Covert Limited. I reviewed the Hex. So I have quite a bit of time behind Jacob Grey guns, and I've never had any reliability issues. Again, I think it's a combination of the port, the comp, and the spring and the ammo that is utilized. And I think, you know, the gun is probably just a tad bit sensitive, and probably, you know, using maybe a heavier spring could address some of that sensitivity. So all that said, reliability, we're going to give it a 12 out of a possible 15. All right, fam. Next up, accuracy. So if I can, I will put up some video footage of the accuracy testing. I was about probably 15 yards out, unassisted. I found the gun to be very, very accurate. To be 15 yards out, unassisted, just standing, I thought that was a pretty tight group. Also, the other thing that I'm looking for when I say accuracy, it is not just kind of barrel accuracy or functional accuracy. It's also shootability. You know, how flat the gun is. Does it allow you to stay on target, which inevitably affects your accuracy, right? How good is the trigger? All those things come into play with the overall shootability of the gun. I found the gun to be very flat shooting, very accurate. Like I said, it was surprisingly flat. So I think they did a really, really good job on that, even at higher rates of speed. I found no problem maintaining that flatness. The dot never left the window. Accuracy, we're going to give it a 10 out of a possible 10. All right, fam, next up, ergonomics. I mentioned earlier that they custom created this grip, and they really set it up so that it contours to the hand. The way that thing is blended all the way around the gun, it's very, very unique. One of the criticisms of the early, and I kind of mentioned this in my initial impressions video, one of the complaints about the early TWC9 models is that there was not enough grip texture on the gun, and I think that was intentional because they were kind of designing that gun as a carry. This gun is a competition pistol, and so they wanted to make sure they gave you a grippy gun. And before I got this gun in my hands, just by kind of looking at that grip, I thought, man, that grip, I thought it was a very attractive looking grip and unique design, but I thought it looked very, very aggressive. And I don't know, fam. As my grip gets better and my shooting evolves, the more it evolves, the more aggressive I want the grip. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm a cheese grater guy. And I got to say, I think the grip texture is really, really well done. It is enough where you can get a solid purchase on the gun, but not so much where you have to wear gloves or it's going to destroy your hands. Some people like, though, a lot of competition shooters I know, they're not happy unless they've got skin follicles all over the range from their guns scraping their hands. But it's not that, but I would say it's just right for ergonomics. We're going to give it a 10 out of a possible 10. All right, fam, these next two categories, we're going to lump them together. Aftermarket support, maintenance, and upkeep. More and more 2011s coming online every single day. More third-party providers working on 2011s every single day. I keep saying at some point I'm going to have to make this a 5 out of 5 category. I think we're getting close there, but not quite close enough. For maintenance and upkeep, this is a Ferrari. It is not a pickup truck. You have to keep it tuned. You have to keep it clean. Every 1,000 rounds or so, break it down, do a thorough cleaning, or do a light clean after every shoot, and you'll be fine. Aftermarket support, we're going to give it 4 out of 5. Maintenance and upkeep, we're going to give it a 4 out of 5. All right, fam. Next up, affordability. So, look, this is an expensive gun, but I will say this. When I look at the other offerings that are similarly equipped, DLC coating, PVD coating, all metal gun, ported and compensated, machined and fitment to the 9s. There are not a lot of guns that can say I do all of those things at a sub $6,000 price point. So I give Jacob Grey a lot of credit for offering you a very feature-rich gun, and a stylistically beautiful gun and a great shooter on top of all that for a sub 6K price point. I'll put the MSRP up there. That said, this is still a very, very expensive firearm. So for affordability, it only gets 3 out of a possible 5. All right, fam. Next up, flex. Is Instagram gonna go crazy? Are your boys gonna be like, damn? Are all the honeys gonna want to shoot your gun? Fam, look at this gun. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. This is one of the things that I was talking about earlier. Like, when great is not good enough, what are you bringing to the table that everybody else at the price point isn't bringing? Okay, we're gonna give you a grip that doesn't look like everybody else's grip. We're going to give you some pop with these PVD accents on the barrel and the small parts. Just very well done. We're going to give you a gun that is both ported and compensated and kind of sight blockish as well. They really, really did it relative to that. And before I did the review, I started posting some pictures and some videos of this on Instagram and other platforms, and everybody responded positively in terms of the aesthetic of the gun. Now, I do think that Jacob Grey is at a price point where people are unaccustomed to seeing their name. And so the snobbier of 2011 collectors and buyers out there are probably saying, well, they don't have a name like Atlas, or they don't have an established brand name like a Fowler or a Combat Precision. I get that. But I think they killed it relative to the aesthetic and the shootability of the gun. For flex, we're going to give this 4 out of a possible 5. All right, fam, you add all of that up, you get a 91 out of a possible 100. Jacob Grey, for the first time, has hit Grail gun status in the 2A in LA scoring system. Congratulations to Jacob Grey. I think you have produced one hellified firearm, my friends. I was very, very pleased with it. Like I said, I just think there needs to be a little dial in relative to the springing of the gun so that the gun will run 100% reliable regardless of the ammunition type that's in it. Probably a little heavier spring would have addressed that, and they did provide a secondary spring in with the gun, and so I'm not going to hold that against them. Look, it scored a 91 out of a possible 100. If it would have been as reliable as every other Jacob Grey gun I've ever shot, you know, they would have been at a 93 or a 94, which would have put it up there with some of the best guns on this channel at a price point that is less than most of those guns. So kudos to Jacob Grey. I think they did a phenomenal job. All right, that's it for this episode, fam. Until next time, as always, take care of one another and peace.